Hey guys, what's up? It's me, Thomas. Tonight we're back here with the VC Andrews Critiquer. Tonight we got another old versus new with the worst witch. So, think of this the prototype Harry Potter, huh? I know it's harsh, but once we get going, you'll understand why I say that. Just, like I said, it's just something to experience, so why don't we take a look back at this, huh? Be sure to like, subscribe for more. Hope you enjoy. Let's go!
Hey guys, it's the VC Andrews Critiquer. Well, as I'm sure a lot of you know, I recently did a mini review of the Witches graphic novel. Well, today we're going to be looking at some more noble witches, but first, tell me if this premise sounds familiar. A kid from a non-magic family discovers that not only are witches and wizards real, but they're one themselves and start attending a school for sorcery, but have a bit of trouble fitting in because of their non-magic background. What's worse, their arch-rival is a cruel and narcissistic bigot towards magical beings from Muggle families and the blatant favorite of the mean potions master who equally despises their guts. But thankfully, they do make two somewhat awkward but still devoted friends, and the kind eccentric old headmaster is also behind them. Within reason, that is. Most of you probably guessed the premise as Harry Potter, and technically you're right. But over 20 years prior, another book series with this premise was written by Jill Murphy, that being The Worst Witch. With that said though, there are some key differences. 1, the majority of the cast is female, and 2, while the Harry Potter series focused more on rare, high-stakes circumstances that grew darker and darker with each installment, this series focused more on the average day-to-day life of the Worst Witch, or Mildred Hubble to be more precise, and the trouble she has adjusting to her new magic environments. But thankfully, it did so in a very amusing way to keep readers engaged. While it naturally has been overshadowed by The Boy Who Lived, it still has a small but devoted cult following, devoted enough to spawn quite a few film adaptations over the years,
this year,
the best known one probably being where Tim Curry sings an awesome song out of nowhere. But unfortunately, that's not one of those that I'm comparing today. No, today we'll be looking at the two TV adaptations, both from subscription services, that being the HBO series in the late 90s and the Netflix series from the new late 10s. And keep in mind 3 things. 1, this is all opinion based, and if you prefer one version over the other, then that's great. 2nd, I'm only doing the first season of both shows because I'm too lazy to cover the entire series from start to finish. So if there are character developments in later seasons that I neglect to mention here, I'm sorry, but I'm only judging what I see. And finally, if you're disappointed why I'm not judging the 80s TV movie version, it's because I feel a 70-minute TV movie against an entire TV series season wouldn't be a fair comparison. Still freaking love Tim Curry though. With that said, let me bewitch you with some amazing comparisons of these two shows. This is Old versus New, The Worst Witch Season 1.
The first one was the school anthem, and this one's the actual opening thing, I'm guessing?
Well, going from a muggle world to a magical world was still hard for Harry Potter. At least he still entered as a celebrity. But our hero was
the boy who lived.
Lucky, only getting in on a trial basis and doesn't exactly soar on her broom during that period, both figuratively and literally. But anyway, while both versions are the worst witch, let's see which one is the best Mildred Hubble.
Anything can happen on Halloween. Your dog could turn into a cat.
In the role of Mildred Hubble, we have Georgina Sherrington in the HBO adaptation and Bella Ramsey in the Netflix one. To say this character is the black sheep of her school would be kind of an understatement. While Harry Potter was usually treated like this.
I'm Harry, sir. Harry Potter. Good lord. Are you really?
This is Mildred's reputation at the school.
Let's begin the tryouts for the talent show. Our first student is, oh dear, Elmira.
But non-justifiably so. Indeed, Mildred really lives up to her title as the worst witch in this first season, where nearly every attempt she makes at magic has unsatisfactory results at best and catastrophic at worst. Even her patient and kind friends can only put up with her crap for so long. But there are definitely some key differences in each incarnation. Sherrington's portrayal is how you'd expect an accident-prone girl like Mildred to be, Awkward, dorky, and with no swag whatsoever.
I mean a particular fear, like the dark. Like a fear of spiders, say. I don't know. It's really right. I've done it, Maud. I've done it. We can't breathe.
Yes, I can hear, Mildred. You've actually made a voice-changing potion that works.
But thankfully, Sherrington does have that geeky charm that's worked for so many other geeks in media that we love, which helps her stay likable despite all the problems she causes. Ramsey, on the other hand, plays her as a bit stronger and more determined.
This time I'm going to surprise a few people.
Sure, she has a couple meek and nerdy traits to her, but she's not someone who your first instinct would be to label a dork. But her spunky attitude also makes her a very fun protagonist, so is it really bad that's just not quite what we expect? Well, I'm afraid it is in this case. Look at who Mildred is, a girl who causes more accidents in a day than a drunk driver does in a year. Plus, the new Mildred seems to cause even more incidents than the original. So downplaying the natural awkwardness of the character just makes her look like a careless punk with no interest in her friend's safety or in learning from her mistakes. The original was a bit easier to forgive because she felt very naturally awkward, but this Mildred, not so much. Also, while the new Mildred is still a pretty nice kid for most of the season, I really hate the huge ego she develops near the end. Okay, let me summarize this for you as simply as I can. Mildred and Miss Cackle find out that the latter's currently depowered evil twin sister Agatha is the rightful heir to the school, and while Mildred promises to keep quiet, she decides to have some fun with her rival Ethel disguised as Maud, trying to find out the secret between the two and say that she's Miss Cackle's niece. But when Miss Cackle finds out, she decides she's had it with Mildred's reckless behavior and grounds her for the remainder of the semester. But Mildred is suspicious since whenever Miss Cackle is more harsh and cold than usual, it's usually Agatha pretending to be her. Okay, fair enough, but then when Miss Cackle shows she still has her powers, Mildred's like,
"The Winker must have gotten them back. The real Miss Cackle would never ground me all semester no matter how much I screw up. I know we're not allowed to leave the grounds right now under penalty of expulsion, but it's worth the risk to find the real Miss Cackle even if I do get expelled and never see my friends again. No one grounds Mildred Hubble."
Maud naturally is not too pleased that Mildred is too full of herself to admit that maybe she just pushed Miss Cackle too far and is even willing to risk never seeing her best friend again just to gratify her ego, and frankly neither am I. Again, both takes of the character are good on their own, but Bella Ramsey's less awkward one just made the character a bit too unsympathetic for my liking. Georgina Sherrington, on the other hand, was such an endearing geek that you could still easily root for her even with all her screw-ups, and feels more like she's trying to learn from them. Point goes to the HBO version.
Yeah.
I made a fool of myself in front of everyone.
Yeah, I'll be real. I'm with you. Like, dude, I'll be real. If I was in her position, I probably would try to keep my head down and try to catch up. Considering, like you said, from Earth to Wizard, so, oof, that'd be a little rough. Plus, yeah, the way you described that, it's like, God, Bella, just shut up. Eesh. Anyway. So who's next?
Okay, so Mildred's not the brightest wand at Cackle's Academy, but it is a whole boarding school, so there's bound to be some star players. So let's see which students excelled more with Best Other Students.
Anything can happen on Halloween. Your dog could turn into a cat.
Now remember, this is only looking at the students who appear in the first season. Those introduced in later ones, like Sybil or Clarice, don't qualify here, unfortunately. Anyway, we should probably start with Mildred's best friend, Ron Weasley. I mean, Hermione Granger. Sorry. Neville Longbottom. Maud Spellbody. Though, to be fair, she does have a lot of Ron's awkward dorkiness and Hermione's brainy nerdiness in her. And even better, she has both of their companionship and loyalty in her friendship with Mildred, being behind her from the very beginning and will never leave her no matter how much she screws up. At least not forever. Hell, she even got super jealous when Enid came around. Talk about a strong bond. Anyway, as to which one is better, I lean towards Maeve Campbell in the Netflix series. As great as Emma Brown's performance is, Campbell is definitely the more charmingly adorable of the two. Kind of like the original Mildred.
Yeah,
Are you
probably
a
the glasses.
Hope so. As long as I can make it to the entrance exam in time. Oh my hat, it's Agatha. We have to tell the Great Wizard.
Plus, the Netflix series focuses a little more on her chemistry with Mildred, how it forms, how it's put to the test, and how Maud realizes that being friends with Mildred is worth it even if she is a klutz, making her character all the more interesting. How about Mildred's other best friend, Fred? George. Enid Nightshed. But again, to be fair, she could give both of them a run for their money as the mischievous school prankster with a kind heart towards those they care about. And which incarnation is better? Again, I have to go with the Netflix one played by Tamara Smart. Because even if she is a rebellious punk, she still has a lot of smart charm and humor to her.
Your turn.
No, I reckon we started enough.
Less than a day. My fastest exposed me yet.
Sad to say, I did not find anything charming about Jessica Fox's Enid. When she's being nice, she's okay, I guess, but when she's being a trickster, she just comes off as an a-hole.
Cackle's birthday party, and I have stupid songs and poems. I know.
So basically a female dog. Give it up.
What? No one misses. We'll all be too busy chanting and that. No.
Shut up.
Don't you understand the mess you've got me in? Me.
But the HBO version does give Mildred a few other not quite as loyal but still amusing friends. There's the modern tech-obsessed Ruby Cherry Tree, who often gets on the old-fashioned Miss Hardbroom's nerves. Though, considering she once invented a robotic dog who tried to overthrow the school, that's not entirely unjustified. There's also two older girls called Fenella and Griselda, who also have some friend George traits to them. Not above playfully messing with Mildred, but have her back at the end of the day. Oh, and there's also this girl called Jadu Wall, who's nice, but also a bit bland. How about Ethel's sidekick Drusilla? The HBO version is mainly just a blonde-haired clone of Ethel, but the Netflix one is portrayed as more awkward and not without a bit of conscience. I personally prefer this one because it makes her feel more distinct from Ethel. Speaking of which, let's talk about Ethel, played by Felicity Jones and Jenny Richardson in each show respectively. Both portrayals almost make Draco Malfoy look like a nice guy. They're rude, conceited, boastful of their pedigree non-stop, and want Mildred out of Cackles at any cost, even if it means framing her for something she didn't do. But there are some differences with each version. While Jones is portrayed as 100%, Richardson is portrayed in a bit more of a tragic light, being the middle child of her family with a mother who obviously prefers her sisters over her.
I will be here next month
for Esmeralda's prize giving. We know that. You wouldn't miss Esmeralda's night for the world.
So this explains why she always feels the need to put down other students and be the cream of the crop in her school. I think a great way to contrast the two is how her rivalry with Mildred starts. In the HBO version, she just starts picking on Mildred for no real reason and officially declares war between the two when she accidentally smacks her in the face with a tree branch. In the Netflix version, the feud starts after Mildred's interference costs her a perfect score on her entrance exam. But even then, she's still willing to team up with Mildred against an even greater threat to the school. So, as you might have guessed, while both Ethels are delightfully cruel, I prefer the one with more pathos and dimension to her character. Plus, she has a fairly interesting relationship with her older sister Esmeralda, who really feels bad for her sister's insecurity and tries to be a good big sis for her. But Ethel makes it very difficult for her too. Tough call, but I am going to go with the Netflix series, mainly because I like the most prominent students in that version better, and it focuses more on their chemistry with one another. Point goes to the Netflix version.
Oh, don't be pathetic.
You're pathetic. Someone had to say it.
But of course, great students always come from great teachers, except in Mildred's case, of course. So which staff gives the one at Hogwarts a run for their money more? Well,
time to find out with
Best Teachers.
Anything can happen on Halloween. Your dog could turn into a cat.
A lot of fun performances to choose from, though none of them were as interesting as my own teachers. Let's start with the Potions Master, Miss Hardbroom, or HB for short. Now this one was the hardest for me to decide because Kate Duchenne and Raquel Cassidy both really capture the Severus Snape in a drag that the character is. They're both ungodly harsh, uptight, belittling, discipline obsessed, and think of Mildred as the equivalent of the Cruciatus curse.
I don't hate you, you silly girl. But this is no place for you.
Me.
And I don't want to see you drag Maud Spellbody down with you.
But like with Snape and Harry, it turns out she was actually behind Mildred all along and was acting like a jerk to gain the villain's trust for her role as the school spy. Nah, I'm just kidding. She's just a cold, tight ass. But she is able to give praise and thanks when it's really deserved. Anyway, if you twisted my arm and forced me to pick one, I think I'd go with the HBO HB.
So,
she just seems like the slightly more stiff and uptight of the two, and her prim old-fashioned attitude is played for laughs more here, making her more enjoyable.
Look at
What
that.
do you think you're all staring at, girls? Have you never seen a woman in a bonnet before?
We've still got to put up with these infernal machines.
If you don't want to use them, you don't have to.
And until that day, Miss Cackle, I'm not putting one foot inside that classroom.
The eccentric Channing teacher Flitwick, I mean, Miss Bats is good in both versions, being helpful to the girls when she needs to be, but is also borderline certifiable. But I again have to side with the HBO one because she has a lot more screen time, and I just laughed a little harder at her gags.
Where's Mildred's class now? In the library. Who's looking after them? I am.
Oh, God.
Toes and tree frogs.
Same goes for the broom-flying teacher, Madam Hooch. I mean, Miss Drill. More screen time, more silly delivery, and also a very interesting take on the character. In this version, she's the only Muggle member of the staff. How she got hired or even found out about Cackle's Academy is unknown, but that's really not important. Because of this, she's often seen partaking in Muggle hobbies and advocating for more modern tech at the school. Hell, she even dresses like an ordinary PE teacher. Though that may be because she also teaches an ordinary non-magical PE class. And on top of that, she really gets a shining moment in this series when she helps Mildred thwart Agatha's first school domination plot. The Netflix version, on the other hand, was the first one to fall under Agatha's mind control spell. It's been pretty one-sided so far, hasn't it? But the last round was towards the Netflix version, so I guess it's only fair. Although I do like how the Netflix version makes some of the staff more antagonistic, like turning the school chef Miss Tapioca into a lunch lady Dolores clone, and even adding a health teacher called Miss Gullet who becomes Agatha's sidekick after being fired. Gives the show some more antagonists and conflict. And finally, let's look at the headmistress herself, Miss Cackle, played respectively by Claire Coulter and Claire Gower. Funny how they both share the same name of Claire. Yeah, that sucked. Anyway, this character is kind of a mix of both Dumbledore and McGonagall. She's a wise and caring leader to the school and a badass fighter despite her age. But she also has very little patience for careless behavior and absolutely none for dishonest. So which one is better? Well, as you may have guessed by the trend in this round, I like the HBO one more. For one thing, I prefer her more spontaneous and extroverted attitude. The Netflix one has a more calm and introverted demeanor, which comes off as a bit boring at times.
Maybe trying to emulate
that, and she never seems quite as
so...
supportive of Mildred. She almost kicked Mildred out in the pilot when she found out she was Muggle-born, and only agrees to her trial period because she saved the school from Agatha. And even then, she never really feels like she has much confidence in Mildred and lashes out at her quite a bit.
That's your problem, isn't it? You never do think.
The HBO version feels like she has more confidence that Mildred can prove herself worthy.
Yeah, again,
and
give it a chance.
Now it's time to say,
unfortunately,
that we're only going to give you one more chance.
Granted, she does chew her out too, but not as often. Even when she reaches her breaking point and grounds Mildred, she only does so for 3 weeks instead of the whole semester like in the Netflix version. Not to mention she changes Mildred's final grade from a C- to an A+ after she saves the school from Agatha in the final episode. That was a nice gesture. So yeah, HBO has my vote on this one. And don't get me wrong, the teachers in the Netflix version are good too, but these ladies just have more screen time, wittier writing, and juicier performances, and thus come off as more bewitching. Point goes to the HBO version.
This foolishness must stop.
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, I'm kind of with them. I mean, compared to the two, like, you're getting cookie cutter stuff over there on Netflix. Well, with HBO, you do get reasons. You know, like the Muggle board teachers, why the headmaster is a little more kind to Mildred, you know? AKA our main character who's Muggle born, you know? So it ain't just her, we got two. So, in a way, it does help, you know, the whole quantity over quantity. Like we saw in the last round. I mean, like I said, makes sense in a way, right? All right, I think we're so far it's 2-1 for the HBO version. So let's see what's next.
Now that we've covered all the residents at Cackle's Academy, let's take a look at frequent visitors, or those that the girls and staff visit. These are the best recurring characters.
Anything can happen on Halloween. Your dog could turn into a cat.
I know I probably should have devoted this round solely to our villain.
Voldemort.
No.
Not
but
you,
there are
Voldemort.
a few other recurring characters that I think are worth mentioning. Let's start with the recurring characters who only appear in each respective show. The ones in the HBO series consist mainly of muggles that the main characters run into while going outside the school, like these Canadian Boy Scouts who show the girls who don't need magic to survive a camping trip, or this greedy CEO who wants to tear down the girls' favorite cake shop and has to be thwarted. It's kind of a neat change of pace to give the girls some non-supernatural friends and foes, but there are some fantastical ones as well, like the Great Wizard's sexist delinquent nephews. They're delightfully unlikable. In the Netflix series, the only original characters I can recall are the girls' parents. Okay, technically they did exist in the HBO one, but the only one we ever see is Ethel's father, Lucius. I mean, Mr. Hollow, I guess, and his not so successful attempt to integrate learning via computers at the school. Though we do get a welcome cameo of the Goosebumps game Escape from Horrorland. Most of the parents only appear in one episode of the Netflix version, but they get across quite a bit. Like Enid's rich parents, who often have to bribe the schools their daughter goes to into letting her stay, Mauds who are just as dorky but lovable as their daughter, and like said before, Ethel's mother thinks the world of her older sis Esmeralda, but not so highly of her, hence the reason for her bitchy attitude. The only one who appears fairly often is Mildred's mother Lily, I mean Petunia. What was her name again? Oh yeah, Julie. A bit awkward like her daughter, and not nearly as awesome as Lily Potter, but she's still pretty nice, and amazingly cool with finding out witches are real and having her daughter go to a school for them. Hey, and at least she's still alive. So far it's kind of a tie. These guest characters aren't great, but they do well at giving support or attention to our leads, I guess. But now let's look at those shared in both shows. But first, quickly note that I'm not counting the rival headmistress Miss Pinnacle or the wizard turned frog Algernon, because they don't appear until later seasons in the HBO version, and I don't think that would be fair. So with that said, there are only two guest characters that both first seasons share. The first is the Great Wizard, who's basically a slightly nicer Cornelius Fudge, and played by Terrence Hardiman and Nicholas Jones respectively. And neither of them come close to Tim Curry's portrayal in the TV movie version. But among the two of them, I think I like Jones' portrayal a little more because he's more tough and badass.
The code? I am the code. I can rewrite it in every line. Now, before I decide what your punishment will be, where is your sister?
And finally, let's look at our big bad, Agatha Cackle. And no contest, the Netflix one is way better. Not just because she has more screen time and more backstory like discussed earlier, but she also just seems like the more cunning and effective of the two. I mean, the original isn't bad or anything, but it's kind of like comparing Dick Dastardly with Scar. The HBO version is the over-the-top mustache-twirling, "The world will be mine!" bad guy.
The entire school and everyone in it will be under my control.
The Netflix version, on the other hand, is a smug, calculating manipulator who comes off as very genuine before we find out she's a villain or when she's posing as her sister Amelia, only showing some subtle clues of her true character, making it more difficult for people to detect her.
She'll get over it. She'll make lots of other friends, good friends, who won't fail her like you did.
Because of this, she's much better at persuading people to do her bidding, so much so that she actually manages to trick Esmeralda into transferring her powers to her, and almost convinced Mildred to do the same. The original is not so convincing at pretending to be her sister.
This kind of clumsiness is typical of you, but it's the last time you're going to be clumsy, It cackles!
And while she does put up a bit of a fight, she goes down almost as easily as Dick Dastardly. The Netflix version always puts up a hell of a fight before she goes down, and it takes quite a few witches to do so. So yeah, the recurring characters are fun in both versions, but since Agatha and the Great Wizard are the most prominent among them, and I like the ones in the Netflix version better,
So that's a win
Netflix
for the
gets
new.
the point
Got
on
a
this
tie.
one.
So
Point
far.
goes to the Netflix version.
Can't you do anything right?
Oh, you couldn't.
I had a
At
little
all
trouble
time.
deciding what the big tiebreaker was going to be. I mean, I couldn't do a best story
story's
round
the same.
since both seasons only adapt a handful of the same plots from the original books
Oof.
and don't really follow a linear story necessarily, at least not
So
until
we're
the
stuck?
last few episodes. But then I decided it is a fantasy, so let's see which fantasy world looks more memorable and imaginative. This is visual style for the win.
Anything can happen on Halloween. Your dog could turn into a cat.
Contrary to popular belief, you don't need big money to create memorable fantasy worlds. So
True,
what if
that's
neither
West Side.
show has particularly good special effects? I mean, they're not terrible or anything, but you'd expect a little more from the subscription services who brought you Game of Thrones and Stranger Things. But this
Well,
is
to be
a
fair,
fantasy,
HBO
so it
came out,
doesn't necessarily have to be
later, before the
realistic. With
service.
some creativity,
Netflix,
you can make a
maybe they
bizarre,
didn't get much money.
imaginative world of witches and wizards. So is that what we get? Well, how do I
Yes
put
and no.
this? The sets in both shows do look very nice and have great cinematography, but tell me what probably first comes to mind when you look at them. Hogwarts, perchance? Thought
Probably,
so.
yeah.
From the school uniforms, to the potions lab, to Miss Cackle's office, to the library, I can't help but wonder if Cackle's Academy
Yeah.
had the same architect as Hogwarts. I know I probably
Again,
shouldn't fault the
remember,
HBO version too much,
Harry Potter
since the
came
Harry
first,
Potter
so we
movies
all
wouldn't be out for
remember-
3 more
think,
years,
boom,
and the
Harry
newly
Potter.
released original books only had a handful of illustrations. But even the influence there, along with the descriptions in the books, are more than a little obvious. And the Netflix
Yeah.
version has no excuse, as all 8 Harry Potter adaptations had been released at that point. But then again, it's not necessarily bad that it wants to be like Harry Potter. I mean, it's only fair given how much inspiration Rowling took from this series. Trouble is, there's not enough that feels like its own thing. It's just a lower budget Hogwarts and not much more. But I guess if I had to
Harsh,
pick
but
one, I'd
accurate
choose
in
the
weight.
Netflix version. The sets are a bit larger and grander, and there's a wider range of colors. So I guess the point goes to the Netflix version winning the match, right?
Wrong.
We
wrong.
But how can that be? I just said I liked the Netflix one better.
Yeah, you literally
well,
just said that.
I actually have a surprise for you all. For the first time ever, I'm awarding this round to a contestant who was not nominated but nonetheless deserves it. That's right, the Tim Curry TV movie version! So you might be wondering why I'm doing something so unorthodox. Well, because it has Tim Curry in it for one. But that aside, this movie does have a very unique look to it that I'd really like to compare to the other 2 shows. At first it might seem a bit odd that I like this style the best, because it definitely has the cheapest looking effects, sets, and cinematography of any adaptation. But it does have the advantage that Harry Potter was still 12 years in the future and thus didn't feel the need to have to copy it. So by having to rely more on their own imagination, the filmmakers present a much more creative and colorful Halloween witch-themed fantasy world that honestly would make a great attraction at Universal Studios. It's a little corny, sure, like how the broom-flying teacher Miss Drill dresses like an aviator, but again, that makes it much more memorable. Speaking of corny, let's talk about the effects in this version. Again, it's clear the filmmakers didn't have the money, but they did have
Again,
the
TV
creativity
movies.
and gave the cheap effects kind of
Oh,
a
wow.
psychedelic 80s music video vibe to them that would not be out of place in Pink Floyd's The Wall, especially during Tim Curry's big musical number.
Something spooky's going down. Anything can happen on Halloween. It's better than a video.
By the way, if you're wondering how the performances compare to both shows, again, Tim Curry rocks as the Great Wizard, and Charlotte Rae gives a fun performance as Agatha, and the rest are okay, I guess. None of the actresses look particularly like their respective characters, except maybe for Mildred and Ethel, but the performances are fine enough, although I don't think any of them would have won against either series. But in this category, the movie certainly did. So I guess that means a
So
tie
now we
for
are
both
stuck with a
shows.
tie.
Again, I know this is very unorthodox,
Seems like a
and I
cop-out.
probably won't be bringing a surprise contest in future, but I wanted
Hopefully
to
not.
hear because
Sorry.
the look of this movie is very unique and worth mentioning. But then
Yeah,
again,
fair.
Tim Curry is in this movie, so there was bound to be something that was. So there you have it. The match.
So, honestly, almost seems like a cop-out, to be honest. So, ignoring the TV film, which was not even introduced, Netflix wins, in a way. So, I mean, fair enough, but what do you guys think? Agree? Disagree? Let me know in the comments. And until next time, like, subscribe for more. Hope you enjoyed. See ya!